My parents said I should walk away from my dream job and move back home to support the family while my brother focuses on his future. I just smiled and said, "Wow, that's crazy," because I was actually about to announce something that's going to change everything. And I have the documents right here to prove it. E. Radit. Longtime lurker, first time poster. I never thought I'd be writing something like this, but here we are. A little background. I'm 30F, and my family has always made it clear that I was the responsible one, while my older brother, George, 32M, was the gifted one. My parents like to say he was born to be a leader, a visionary, someone who would change the world. Meanwhile, I was expected to be practical, stable, and supportive. They didn't mean it as an insult. At least I don't think they did, but the message was clear. George was a star, and I was the one who would keep things running in the background. Growing up, that dynamic shaped everything. George was given every opportunity. When he wanted to try soccer, my parents bought him the best cleats, paid for private lessons, and went to every game. When I wanted to try dance, "That's expensive, sweetie. Why don't you join a club at school instead?" It only got worse with time. When college came around, George didn't have to worry about a thing. My parents covered his tuition, rent, and living expenses without question. I, on the other hand, was told that I needed to take out loans because college is an investment in yourself. So I did. I worked part-time jobs, budgeted every dollar, and built my future on my own. I struggled, but I made it. And now, after years of grinding, I finally landed my dream job. It pays well, it's in a city I love, and it's everything I worked for. I thought for once my parents would be proud. They weren't. A few days after I told them the good news, my mom called and said they wanted to have a family dinner. Now, I should mention, my parents don't do family dinners unless they have an agenda. Usually, it means one of two things. Either they need a favor or they want to talk about something important, which in our family always revolves around George. But I went anyway, hoping, just hoping, that maybe for once they wanted to acknowledge my success. I should have known better. When I got there, the mood was weirdly serious. My parents sat at the table, my dad clearing his throat like he was about to make some big speech, while George leaned back in his chair, looking completely at ease. I barely had time to sit down before my dad launched into it. "Your mother and I have been thinking a lot about the future," he said, folding his hands together like this was some boardroom meeting. "And we realize that now is the time for us to come together as a family, to support each other." I raised an eyebrow. "Okay." My mom sighed like this was difficult for her. "Honey, we know you've been so independent all these years, and we admire that. Really, we do." That was already a red flag. My parents don't admire independence. They tolerate it. She continued, "But the thing is, George has an incredible opportunity ahead of him, maybe his biggest yet. And in order for him to really focus, we need to make sure he's not dealing with unnecessary stress." I glanced at George, who gave me a smug little smile before looking away, like this was all beneath him. Dad jumped back in. "We've been talking, and we think the best thing for the family would be for you to move back home for a little while, just to help out." I blinked. "Help out how?" Mom smiled like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. "Well, just taking care of things around the house, managing bills, making sure everything runs smoothly. That way, your brother can focus on his future without distractions." I stared at them. "So, you want to quit my job, move back here, pay your bills, and handle everything so George can what? Start another business?" George finally spoke up, rolling his eyes. "It's not just another business. It's a real opportunity this time. I have investors lined up, but I need to put all my energy into it." My dad nodded like this made perfect sense. "Exactly. And we all need to make sacrifices for the greater good." I almost laughed. "We need to make sacrifices?" I had spent my whole life sacrificing. I sacrificed my childhood to be the responsible one. I sacrificed my free time to work part-time jobs while George got everything handed to him. I sacrificed my savings while they threw money at his endless string of failed ideas. And now, when I finally had something of my own, they wanted me to throw it away. For him, I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Wow, I said slowly, that's crazy, because I was actually about to announce something that's going to change everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder. Immediately, the mood in the room shifted. My parents exchanged a look, and George sat up a little straighter. I placed the folder on the table, tapping it lightly. Inside was something they never saw coming. I looked around at their faces, then smiled. So, I said, who wants to go first? There was a long, awkward silence. My dad was the first to speak. What's this? I could tell he was trying to sound neutral, but there was something uneasy in his tone, like he already knew whatever was inside that folder wasn't going to be what he wanted to hear. I leaned back in my chair, keeping my expression calm. Well, before you brought up this whole family sacrifice plan, I actually had some news of my own, and I figure now's as good a time as any to share. George scoffed. Oh, come on. Do we really have to do this right now? We're in the middle of an important discussion. I turned to him. Yeah? Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like we're in the middle of a conversation about how I should throw my life away for you. So if you don't mind, I think I'll go ahead and take my turn to talk. George made a face, but didn't say anything. My parents, on the other hand, were watching me closely now. I slowly slid the folder toward them. Go ahead. Open it. My mom hesitated before finally flipping it open. Her eyes skimmed the first page, and her expression instantly changed. Her lips parted slightly, her brow furrowed. My dad leaned in to read over her shoulder. George, impatient as always, grabbed the folder and pulled it toward himself. The moment he saw what was inside, his jaw tightened. What is this? He muttered. I tilted my head. You tell me. He flipped through the pages like he was trying to make sense of it, but I already knew exactly what he was looking at. Paperwork, documents, evidence, things they had never bothered to ask me about because to them, I was just existing. I was the extra, the one who wasn't worth checking in on unless it was to remind me of my responsibilities to the family. My dad cleared his throat, his voice strained. What is this? I leaned back slightly, watching them, letting them sit in their own confusion. That, I said slowly, is a collection of documents I've been putting together for a while now. And before you ask, yes, they're real. And yes, I have more. My mom's lips pressed together. Honey, what exactly is this supposed to mean? George was still flipping through the pages, his face growing tighter and tighter with every second. His usual smug expression was completely gone, replaced by something else. Something uglier. Panic, because he knew exactly what it meant. My dad frowned, picking up one of the pages. His eyes scanned the text, and his face paled slightly. This says. I nodded. Fraud, tax evasion, misuse of investor funds. Need me to keep going? My mom inhaled sharply. George slammed the folder shut. He started, his voice sharp, but I cut him off before he could even get the words out. It's true, George, I said, my voice calm. And you know it. For a split second, he didn't say anything. His eyes darted from me to the folder, then to my parents. Then, like clockwork, his expression shifted. He scoffed, shaking his head. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. You seriously expect mom and dad to believe this? Me committing fraud? Get real. I tilted my head. Believe it or not, that's not my problem. The IRS, though? The investors? The authorities? That's their problem. My dad's hands were visibly shaking now as he flipped through another page. My mom, for once in her life, was completely speechless. George let out a breathy laugh, like this was all some elaborate joke. You're actually serious. Oh, I'm very serious, I said, voice smooth. And the best part? This is just the surface. I have emails, bank records, and a very interesting recorded conversation that someone was kind enough to pass along to me. That got him. His eyes snapped to mine, something dangerously close to fear flashing across his face. You're bluffing. I smiled. Try me. George's fingers curled into fists. What do you want? I let the question hang in the air for a second before I leaned in just slightly, my voice dropping low. What do I want? I repeated. Nothing. Because, unlike you, I don't make a habit of messing with people over for personal gain. I tapped the folder. This isn't about what I want. It's about what happens next. My mom finally spoke, her voice tight. You wouldn't actually do anything with this, right? I turned to her, and for the first time in my life, I saw it. The realization that maybe, just maybe, she had underestimated me. I guess, I said lightly, that depends on him. George's jaw clenched. His breathing was shallow now. His world was tilting, and he knew it. For the first time ever, I held all the power. The silence in the room was deafening. My parents were still staring at the folder in disbelief, unable to wrap their heads around the documents that had just shattered the image they'd always had of George. George, for his part, was no longer acting cocky. He was visibly sweating, his fingers trembling as they clenched into fists. I could feel the tension tightening like a noose around all of us. My dad was the first to speak, but his voice was different now, strained, almost panicked. You're accusing him of all this? You really expect us to believe you? His eyes flicked between the folder and me, as though expecting me to suddenly break into laughter to tell him it was some sort of elaborate prank. I shook my head slowly, holding his gaze. I don't expect you to believe me, Dad. I'm not here to convince you. I glanced over at George, who was still holding the folder, clearly struggling to keep his composure. You know it's true. You just don't want to face it. My mom was staring at me now, her lips pressed together, and I could see the struggle on her face. For the first time in my life, I saw something other than indifference in her eyes. Was it guilt? Regret? She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. George let out a harsh laugh, trying to recover his bravado. This is a joke, right? You're really trying to ruin my life over some stupid paperwork. He looked at my parents as though searching for validation, but none came. Instead, his frustration grew. I leaned in, my voice steady. This isn't about some paperwork, George. This is about everything you've done over the years and the damage you've caused to other people, people who trusted you. You've used this family's name, their resources, and you've lied to everyone, including me. The words stung, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I've been standing in your shadow for years, cleaning up after your messes while you failed, and you always had the comfort of knowing you'd get another chance. But me? I had to build everything on my own. I had to sacrifice everything just to get to where I am. My voice rose, though I kept myself in check. You've had more than enough chances, George, and I'm done covering for you. I saw George's eyes narrow, his face contorting with a mix of rage and panic. You think you've got it all figured out? You think you can just expose me and walk away unscathed? You're just as much a victim as I am. You don't know what I've been through, what I'm trying to do here. You're right, I said coldly. I don't know what you've been through, but I know what you've put everyone else through, and I'm done being your scapegoat. There was another pause, heavy with the realization that nothing would ever be the same again. My mom opened her mouth again, but this time she actually spoke. What do you want from us? What is this about? I looked directly at my parents. I want you to finally see me, to see what I've accomplished without any of your help, and to stop pretending George's mistakes are my responsibility to fix. For once, stop treating me like the backup plan and stop enabling his behavior. My dad's face turned pale, the weight of my words sinking in. George was still fuming, trying to argue, but I cut him off again. If you want to support him, fine. But I'm not going to sacrifice everything for him anymore. I'm not asking for your approval. I've already made my decision. The ball's in your court. I stood up and walked toward the door, not looking back. I didn't need to. The realization that I was free from their expectations, from George's manipulation, from the family's toxic dynamics, was enough. The quiet that followed my words felt suffocating. I didn't look back as I stood by the door, my hand resting on the handle, but I could hear George's ragged breathing, my parents' soft murmurs of confusion and disbelief. They weren't used to being confronted like this. It had always been George in the spotlight, always him at the center of the family's world. Me? I had always been the invisible one, except when they needed something. But not tonight. Are you just going to leave? My mom's voice, thin and shaky, broke the silence. I turned slightly, enough to see them all sitting there, faces drawn in shock and confusion. George had his hands over his face, trying to hide the panic that was starting to creep in. My dad was staring at the folder, unable to comprehend how it had all come to this. And my mom, she didn't know what to say. She had never been one to stand up for me, but now that the truth was out, she didn't know where to place her loyalty. No, I said, my voice low, controlled. I'm not leaving forever, but I'm done playing the part you've assigned me. I've done my part for this family, and now it's time for me to do what's right for me. They all stared at me in silence as I took one last look at the room, at the family that had never truly seen me, only the role I was supposed to fill. I could almost hear the unspoken words swirling in the air. My parents were too afraid to speak up, still caught in their loyalty to George and his big idea. George was too rattled to say anything meaningful. I'll let you figure this out, I added, the words coming easier now, though I could feel the ache in my chest. But don't think for 1 second that I'm going to be here to clean up your messes anymore. I took a step back, turning the door handle. For a moment, I wondered if they would try to stop me. I wondered if my parents would beg me to stay, if George would apologize, or if they'd all pretend like nothing had changed, like they could keep pretending that their world wasn't falling apart. But no one moved. Goodbye, I said softly, and with one last glance at them, I stepped out into the night. It's been a few days now since that dinner. My phone hasn't stopped blowing up. My parents have tried to call and text, but I haven't answered. I know George has probably been spinning some story to get them on his side, but I'm done. I've been sitting with it, trying to figure out if what I did was justified. On the one hand, I'm finally standing up for myself after years of feeling invisible, and I'm proud of that. But on the other, I'm questioning if I went too far. Is it really right to drop such a bomb on them like that, especially when they didn't see it coming? I can't shake the feeling that I might have made things worse than they had to be. Now my family's falling apart. My parents are heartbroken. George is angry, and I'm not sure if I'm in the wrong here or not. So, Reddit, am I the a-hole? Should I have handled this differently? Or was I justified in finally standing up for myself, even if it meant destroying the fragile dynamic we had left? I'm honestly unsure, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Thanks for reading. If you enjoyed the story and want to see more content like this, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on the situation. Do you think they were justified or did they go too far?